George and his girlfriend Zoe agreed to help out their friend Corey by watching his dog Rex. They didn't know how things would turn out, as Rex seemed like a well-behaved dog. When he started acting strange, George began to worry. Rex started to jump on Zoe and wouldn't leave her alone. Why was he doing that? George decided to keep an eye on the situation, trying to find the reason behind Rex's strange behavior. He called Corey to ask him about Rex's behavior and if it sounded familiar to him, but Corey informed him that Rex had never displayed such behavior. George wanted to understand what was going on. How did they get into this mess? Let's go back to the beginning. One day, while George was making breakfast, he noticed a notification on Zoe's phone. She wasn't in the room, and though he felt he should respect her privacy, curiosity got the better of him when he saw the number wasn't a saved one. He read the message, which said, "George can't know about this. I'll tell him when the time is right." He put the phone down immediately and pretended nothing was happening when Zoe came into the kitchen. He was feeling suspicious, and over the next few days, he noticed her doing strange things like sneaking out at night. What was going on? Before we continue, make sure to subscribe, hit the like button, and click the notification bell for more amazing stories. Their friend Corey had an upcoming work trip coming up, and he wasn't able to take his Doberman with him. Usually, he'd leave Rex with his trusted dog sitter, but due to a last-minute family emergency, Corey was left with no options. He was desperately trying to find a solution, so he called George, explaining the situation to him. Corey came over to George's place to try to convince him. At first, George hesitated, not knowing how Zoe would take it, since she was afraid of big dogs. Just as George was contemplating the situation, Zoe came home, and the friends were able to appeal to her directly. Corey told her that since Rex was a former police dog, he was a well-trained dog that listened well. They told her she didn't need to worry, but this did little to assuage her feelings, since unbeknownst to either George or Corey, she was worried about something else altogether. In the end, Zoe agreed to dog-sit Rex while Corey was away, but wanted it to be clear that this could not become a regular thing. Corey thanked them profusely and said that this would be a one-time thing. A few days later, he dropped Rex off at their house. Although Rex was a physically large dog, he was well-behaved, as Corey had said. He listened to all commands, walked calmly with them when they went on walks, and didn't cause a lot of commotion. A few days in, Zoe wasn't so nervous about Rex anymore, and she actually started to enjoy having him around. They settled into a routine. George took Rex on his morning, afternoon, and nighttime walks, while Zoe fed him and picked up his toys. With the routine and ground rules in place, everything was going well at first. 3 days into caring for Rex, Zoe and George were happy with how it was going. However, everything changed when George noticed Rex starting to act strangely. He began to bark and scratch at their bedroom door at night. George thought he needed to go outside, but Rex refused to leave the house. He also started to pace in front of the sofa while Zoe was watching TV, and sometimes he would just sit and stare at her without moving. Why was he doing this? George and Zoe began to worry, so they called Corey. Corey was surprised to hear the news, but he reassured his friends that it must be because Rex was missing him and was stressed because he was not staying in his own home as he would have been if the dog sitter was available. It sounded reasonable to them, and after a few days, Rex went back to acting normally. They returned to the routine, but one morning, while Zoe was getting ready, Rex came into the bedroom. She didn't think much of it and kept getting ready. All of a sudden, Rex let out a low, whining sound and jumped on top of her. She was taken aback by this, and being the big dog that he is, she fell back onto the bed. She couldn't move, and she screamed with terror. George ran into the room, and without a second thought, grabbed Rex by the collar and pulled him off of Zoe. He pulled him out of the room and closed the door. Zoe was in absolute hysterics and demanded that they call Corey to come back immediately to pick up his dog. George was stunned by Rex's behavior, and so he immediately called Corey. When the call didn't go through, he remembered that Corey had told him that he'd be outside of cell phone service for a few days. George and Zoe didn't know what to do, but they felt bad locking Rex outside of the house. Ultimately, he hadn't hurt her, and they considered that perhaps he thought they were just playing. Still, Zoe kept a distance, but the problem was that he would not leave Zoe's side. He was very affectionate towards her, lying down next to her on the sofa and placing his head on her stomach. George was so confused about what was behind Rex's behavior. George knew that Rex was once an airport police dog, but was retired at this point. Corey adopted him after he retired. George wondered about what Rex had done while he was in service. He decided to look up what exactly airport police dogs do, and then he looked up what retired police dogs do. What he discovered stunned him, and he couldn't believe what he was reading. The more he looked up Rex's behavior, the more he realized that perhaps it wasn't so strange after all. His feelings of suspicion shifted from Rex towards Zoe. However, he also considered the chance that he could just be paranoid. His head felt like it was spinning, but he decided to keep an eye on her. The next day, he did notice something unusual with Zoe. He realized that she was avoiding eye contact with him and was keeping to herself more than usual. Then he found the strange message on her phone. A few days after he read the message, Zoe told George that she needed to go to town to pick something up. He waited until she left, and then he decided to follow her. He took Rex along with him and followed her to a gas station outside of town. She got out of the car and stood in the parking lot. Who was she waiting for? George remained in the car, and Rex began to whine from the back seat. He felt guilty about watching her like this, but he had to know what was going on. Then, Zoe walked behind the building, blocking George's view. She was there for about 20 minutes before coming back and driving home. George rushed to get back home before her, and when she got home, he tried his best to act as normal as possible. He didn't want her to suspect anything. While he didn't want to assume anything about the situation, he couldn't help but feel quite suspicious. He had an idea about what he thought was happening, but he needed proof before he could accuse her of anything. George didn't want to, but he couldn't help but think back to the strange message he saw on Zoe's phone. Why was she acting so secretively and acting strange? His mind combed over all the worst-case scenarios. He wanted to trust her, but he found it hard to do, given how he felt that she was keeping secrets from him. George didn't know what to do. He considered confronting her about it, as he figured it would be best to just ask her directly and stop the horrible thoughts that were haunting him. However, when he tried to bring it up, she was nervous and would change the subject immediately. This made him feel worse. Why would she avoid the conversation if nothing was going on? Zoe started to spend less time at home and would often not be home in time to feed Rex. When George confronted her about that, she had excuses ready. Rex was still attached to Zoe, rubbing his head on her legs and jumping on her whenever she was sitting, which made her even more irritated. Things were really getting out of control, and as time passed, Zoe was staying out of the house later and later, saying that she was busy with work. George tried to calm himself down, saying that she was avoiding being home in order to avoid Rex, but he had a bad feeling about the whole situation. He decided to look up more information about Rex and tried to track down the officer that had worked with him at the airport. Maybe the officer would have some insights into Rex's behavior, and perhaps that could lead to answers about Zoe. As George continued his search, he realized that it was more complicated than he initially expected. As it turned out, the police weren't excited about handing out information to anyone that was looking. Of course he understood, but he was still frustrated. He just wanted to know what was going on with Zoe, and also with Rex. Although it was rash, George decided to directly to the source and drive to the airport. He would look for anyone working there who might be able to help him. He was planning to tell everyone that he was watching Rex, and hopefully, that way he'd find someone who knew the dog. However, his plan didn't go as he had expected. Of course, was a bit suspicious to the airport workers. After a half an hour of his behavior, George was escorted out of the airport following some warnings. However, he felt that he couldn't stop there. He knew he needed answers. He wasn't sure who to turn to next, but then strange happened. After he arrived home following being kicked out of the airport, he noticed that once again Zoe was not home, and that Rex had chewed up one of the couch cushions. As he was cleaning up, he got a phone call from a blocked ID. He decided to answer, although he was nervous about it. The man on the line asked him if he was the one looking for his old police dog Rex. George wasn't sure what to do, but at the same time, he thought that the man's voice was familiar, so he told the man that he was. The man on the line then told him that he was in over his head and to stop poking around now. The call then disconnected, and George was left feeling as confused as ever. At this point, George was beyond confused. He was feeling quite unsettled at this point. Who was this man on the phone, and why did he feel like he recognized the voice? Did he have anything to do with Zoe and her strange behavior? He felt like his world was spinning around him, and he couldn't keep up. George decided to go for a long run and took Rex along with him. He was hoping that it would tire both of them out, and that he'd be able to get some restful sleep that night. When he got home, Zoe was waiting for him, and she was upset. She asked him where he had been the whole day, and he gave her short answers, saying that he went for a run. She pointed out that he couldn't have been only out on a run the whole day. George felt that it was pretty crazy of her to question him about where he was all day after she's been disappearing for entire evenings recently. Couldn't help but feel resentful, and a fight quickly ensued. They also argued about the ruined couch cushion, but the real reason behind the fight was being avoided. George was about to confront her about the gas station, and then something happened. Rex began to move around the room with his ears pricked up nervously. He then began to bark and ran in front of the front door. This stopped their fighting, and they looked at one another, wondering what had caused Rex to act so defensively. They started to feel worried, and George demanded that Zoe go upstairs, which she did. They felt a sense of foreboding. What could it be? George checked their security camera's footage and saw a man he didn't know standing at their doorway. He was wearing all black, and he got close to the house and knocked on the door. He began to demand to see Zoe. For George, this was too much. He needed to understand just what was happening. As Rex was still barking at the door, George felt like this was too much to handle on his own. He decided to call the police to help him out in this situation. Maybe this whole situation would force Zoe to be more honest about what was going on. He hoped that at the very least, the police would intimidate this man banging on his door. Zoe was hiding away upstairs, with only her thoughts and worries with her. She had no clue what was going on downstairs and who the strange man was. She thought about how strangely George was acting and wondered if this had anything to do with it. Could she tell George what she'd been keeping from him now? In an instant, the barking and knocking seemed to stop. Zoe wasn't sure what to think. She waited to see if George would come up to let her know what was going on, but after a while, she realized nobody was coming. She then decided to go down herself and see if she could figure it out. She had no idea what she would soon hear. She heard George speaking with somebody on the phone, and from what she understood, she believed he was talking to the police and telling them about the man knocking on the door. Zoe thought that he was overreacting, but at the same time felt reassured that he was taking the situation seriously. What on earth was actually happening? George didn't notice that Zoe was listening in on his conversation with the police, but as he looked out the window, he saw that the meme disappeared. After a few minutes, he heard sirens wailing outside as the police arrived. The man was still gone as the police knocked on their door. 2 police officers arrived on the scene after they were alerted about an attempted home intrusion. George let them in and explained the situation to them, including that the man had disappeared the second he heard the sirens. However, he opened up and said that this was not the only reason he called them. He was also worried about Zoe. Zoe heard George calling her to come down, and she hesitated for a moment. She felt safe upstairs, especially now that Rex had joined her there. What if the man was still there, but hiding? George called her twice more, saying the police wanted to speak with her. She finally went downstairs. She thought she'd be giving them details about the strange man, but she was about to be surprised. When Zoe got downstairs, with Rex closely following her, she saw the two police officers, who themselves looked quite confused. They have her a strange look, as if they were suspicious of her. She asked George what was going on and where the strange man was. His response stunned her. George explained that he called the police because of her strange behavior lately. He said that he learned that Rex had been a drug detection dog while he worked at the airport, and his reactions to her were the same as though there were drugs around. He told her about following her to the gas station and seeing the text, all of which made him suspicious. He just wanted her to tell him the truth. Zoe couldn't believe what George was saying. She was immediately hurt and angry. How did he dare come to this insane conclusion about her? How could he believe that she was actually involved with drugs? She couldn't believe he was following her around and snooping on her text messages. She knew it was time to finally fill him in on what was going on. Zoe took a deep breath and told him that she was going to tell him the truth about what was going on lately. She was so hurt by his accusations and the fact that he hadn't respected her privacy. She told him that she found an article describing a dog that was able to sense that its owner was pregnant. She then thought that maybe this could be the reason Rex was acting up, so she went to the gas station to get a pregnancy test. It turned out that she was pregnant, but she was afraid to tell him. There was a history of early miscarriages, so she wanted to wait to tell him. The entire room became awkward, and George felt horribly guilty for what he said to Zoe. The police congratulated the couple, but clearly looked annoyed with George. Rex nuzzled by Zoe once again, and she pet him. She hoped that they could move past this mess, and that everything would be okay. Binding bonds through beautiful tales. Thank you for watching.